Hi, I'm Gianluca Fiorelli and welcome back to the third session. Today we are going to have our guest is coming directly from Minneapolis, if I'm not wrong. He is the founder and CEO, or let's say for the second time, CEO of Top Rank, a B2B marketing agency. And we are going to talk a lot about B2B, but not just in the classic, how can B2B do content which is not boring, blah, 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 all the classic things that are said about B2B. I work also a lot with B2B, and it's a fascinating type of niche. Hmm, Maybe not so sexy as, B2C, D2C, but the challenges are the same, if not even bigger. Our guest is, I would say, one of the most respected figure in SEO and search in general. And I would say he has so many years of experience that to put him just inside the square of SEO would be limiting. His knowledge is more than just SEO. I would say digital marketing is expertise, the correct definition for our guest. And our guest is Lee Odden. Hey, hi Lee.
Hey,
How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Gianluca. I appreciate you introducing that way. I call myself a recovering SEO
Hmm.
sometimes because that was my entree into the marketing world is through search, optimizing web pages for Hotbot, Lycos, InfoSeek. You remember those
Hmm.
names
Yeah,
way
yeah.
back in the day, and evolved like a lot of search people have to expand to the broader mix of marketing tactics, being the best answer, as I like to say, wherever customers are looking. It's great to be
Mm,
here.
yeah, yeah, yes. And I mean, I was saying B2B is sometimes it's very frustrating, but when you are able to fulfill the objective, to reach the objective you have planned with your clients, it's even more satisfying. Because the
I
challenge
agree.
is, I mean, let's be honest, being having as a client, for instance, Nike. I mean, you don't have to care about promotion. I mean, it's Nike. Everybody, you don't have to care so much about branded searches. Yes, there are some peculiar things about branded searches for this kind of big brands because people know what is Nike. The problem is becoming really more a project management issue in terms of making things being done by Nike, for instance, for the technical part, for other things. But for a B2B, even if the B2B is very big, very well known in the niche, it's more complicated, I think.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, purchasing a new pair of runners tennis shoes is a different thing than a buying committee of 10 people who all have to agree on a vendor recommendation, and the expense is $1 million, and the implementation takes 6 to 9 months. A sales cycle is 18 months. That's a
Yeah, yes, I have a client
it's a
of this
it's a
kind because it's in the industrial cable industry.
yeah.
And terrific because whenever we need to just change a comma, it must pass through engineers to see if that comma is maybe changing the meaning of the page. And so the page is not really consistent with all the standard specification that
Yeah.
that cable must comply with. So yes, it's not like changing
Yeah,
the
it's different. I think you said something about, there's some satisfaction when you see results. And I think one thing that's interesting to me about B2B is that it's a longer chase, right? It's a longer time, which presents many more opportunities to create content that's findable in all the places where it needs to be. And because there's this reputation of B2B, meaning boring to boring, right? You think you nodded to that a little bit. That actually, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, right? So that actually spells lots of creative opportunity because so much of what does get published from a content perspective in B2B is kind of mediocrity. And with AI, that's even more mediocrity at scale, right? The the truly creative messaging, storytelling opportunities are rich in B2B because at the end of the day, people behind those businesses are humans too, right? They go to Instagram, they go to TikTok, they go to these other consumer focused channels, and it's the mix that adds up to building trust, building relevant visibility. But in B2B, because it's such a large considered purchase, you've got to have people that truly believe the brand content. They've got to believe the message and the promise that, buying this or that type of software is actually going to deliver the return, because jobs are on the line. You make the wrong mistake and recommending a multi-year, multi-million dollar software application, goodbye, right? So there's a lot of due diligence involved in a B2B sales cycle, and that creates lots of opportunities for search, for AI visibility, for influencers, for social. I mean, all the different email, ads, all the different channels all add up. And so that long chase is very satisfying when you really hit it.
Yes, I think you touched something like an interesting topic, which is the creativity in the context of B2B. And because I think that creativity is many people, many also in our industry, SEO, but in general, is always when it comes to web is considered as content creator in general, something which is in B2B related to text. When actually this is an old classic mistake. Content is not just text. Content can be
Of course.
a series of short explaining things in a way that is easy to understand, really talking about to the buyer persona the B2B company is targeting. And or it can be a podcast area with people working in the niche of a B2B and creating discussion, or even if you find the correct company to do it, even creating your own B2B forum about your niche and owning the UGC field about your niche, which is now we know how much important it is, and so on and so on. So it's even creating software. I mean, you were talking about multi-million software companies, and I mean, freemium was invented also for that. You have a freemium, you can use it as a content to promote yourself, not just to show off what you do, or as a way to buy potential clients.
Well, and it really depends on the expectations and who the audience is. If I'm Let's say we've worked with a really popular software, a project management software company, right? And
Hmm.
small businesses will buy individual licenses, or they'll buy 10 seats or something like that. So it's kind of a consumerish sort of marketing vibe there. And so, visibility and the keywords and the topics and the problems to be solved with that are kind of leaning towards consumer types of problems to be solved. And so you can execute consumer marketing types of tactics, right? And from a creative standpoint, I mean, you may know, I lean very heavily into working with creators and influencers, right? So, for that particular project management software company, we're exclusively focusing on TikTok. How to use, how using this project management software can make your life better, make your work better, whatever. That's very different than a large enterprise software application that, let's say everyone has AI as part of their platform now, but there are these large enterprise companies with complex businesses and business units and that sort of thing, where the software that runs what they do, requires other software to make it actually work. And so that kind of content and that audience is not for the user, it's for the senior level executive who's going to sponsor the budget to make that large expenditure, right? But it's also there are other stakeholders, right? That could be legal, there could be finance, procurement, IT, HR. I mean, who knows? It depends on who's involved. So having some understanding about who the audience is can help inform you about what your options for creativity are, right? If it's a user buyer, you can get super creative. But if you're a senior level executive, you're probably not going to you might not want to watch a cartoon or, a cartoon representation, an animated cartoon representation about how this enterprise software can actually solve business problems.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think that sometimes this kind of content for this so surgical type of targeting, in reality, but it's buried in. PDF, support, subdomains, dev subdomains, and so on and so on and so on. So many times you don't really need to reinvent the wheel. You have just to discover, like an archaeologist, where things have been buried.
Yeah, that really speaks well to the notion of optimization, doesn't it? In that
Mhm.
what when you take an audit and inventory, what is it that we're working with? And I'm sure you do this with your clients. It's
Yes.
what is our starting point? What is our current situation? And doing a content audit one of the things does is exactly what you just described is identify maybe some unrealized or unoptimized
In fact,
content
I,
opportunities.
in fact, I call it exactly this. I don't call it just as a gap analysis. I call
Mm,
it gap and opportunity analysis. Because
sure.
sometimes you have things already there, but maybe, or because they are buried, or maybe because they are not buried, they are really in front of a potential customer, but not in the correct format. I mean, in the correct, I'm not talking in terms of conversion rate optimization, but it's really closer. Is just like I always think in terms of semiotic and semantics. So it's really why this block is, which is the most important block, is in the bottom at the bottom of the page, and you are not pushing that. This is useful for the user to better understand the page, but it's also giving a more strength for search engines and AI models, LLMs, because they are using
Yeah,
natural language processing. We know in Western language, from the top left to the
right.
right, to the bottom to the right, is how importance is considered in a content.
Yeah, and you obviously you're seeing a lot of the best practices for AI search optimization to include these summaries, and you have platforms like Webflow and others who say that they can automatically identify these opportunities and then actually make the content for you, which I'm not so sure I would trust
No,
entirely. But the idea though, well, look, we go back 10, 12 years, 15 years, when the things we were doing in terms of SEO best practices, keywords, links, and all that sort of thing. And then everybody started to do that, right? And these patterns are very recognizable. And I think the same thing will happen with AI search optimization, right? In terms of the type of content format or reformatting that
hmm,
people are undertaking. And, ultimately, as the AI platforms monetize through ads or whatever, they go the route of Google in terms of how to make money. There's going to be some reckoning, I suppose, in that the types of things that we do to make it easier for them to ingest our content. I don't know. Maybe it'll be commoditized. Maybe I think there's always going to be an opportunity to differentiate, and I think that's a human led effort. I think that is driven by a keen understanding of the information, what we call the information journey or the buyer information journey. So there's a sales
exactly.
cycle, but the buyer information journey is having insight like audience intelligence and buyer intelligence about how is it that the audience that you're after, how do they discover information? Like what are their preferences? Where are they going to ChatGPT and then going to Google to validate? And then are they asking their friend or are they going to that private community you just talked about, the UGC, private niche community that the B2B brand has created to validate who is the best solution? What are their preferences for content consumption, right? Do they like video? Do they like old school PDFs and white papers?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
they like long form video? And then what are the triggers that motivate them to take action? So having that information journey mapped out, I think, is the source of truth. So yeah, today we have these TLDR summaries on top and our FAQs and all those sorts of things. That's fine. But I think ultimately your source of truth has to be what the buyer preferences are, because then you're continuously optimizing against what's real as opposed to what's the tactic du jour or the best practice, I guess, silver bullet or shiny object of the day.
Yeah, yes, and that's why testing is so important. Not shipping everything all at once, but always prototyping stuff and test it live with real user and see how using, for instance, Microsoft Clarity, if you don't want to use specific focus group before the rollout, in order to understand if it's really working. And one of the things that now I'm going to sound like ChatGPT, that nobody is talking about, is that many are refactoring their pages, forgetting that maybe their pages were working well, they were ranking well, they were already visible in the AI answer, and they were already converting and they just refactor it because of some, you must chunk thing and without explaining what really means chunk
Mm.
for
Hmm.
an AI model. And you destroy all the efforts in terms of visibility you already earn, of ranking you already earn, of traffic, and so on and so on. I've seen many cases of this just because of trying to be more visible on ChatGPT in Perplexity, for instance.
Yeah. Well, it's been an interesting.
Question from
Yeah.
consultant to, let's say, consultant
Okay.
to, how do you put a break to, if you have clients that are maybe pushing you, hey, we must be present in ChatGPT, and maybe pushing for doing things that you say, okay, go down, slow down, slow down. How you do it?
So, yeah, sure. We are seeing companies who are taking a programmatic approach
Mm.
where they want to operationalize the whole thing, and they're implementing. They're making software investments, and they're maybe putting a certain amount of trust in AI visibility trackers, which is, as we know, is not the same thing as how a search ranking situation might happen, but relatively, at least, identifying the kinds of topics they feel they need to show up for, and then tracking those, and then reconciling that against the content that they have, and operationalizing through software this whole thing, and trying to scale. And I'm talking about large enterprises, not a small or medium business, trying to scale their AI optimization efforts
Mhm.
accordingly. Obviously, there are human milestones or touch points in that process for approval and whatnot, but that's one thing I kind of say, hey, now, maybe this is a thing we can test to see, because if you are overcommitting, all like you just made a really good point about people making changes and then foregoing all that progress that they made in the spirit of chasing the new. And I think it's about most mature marketing groups have a methodology for adopting new technologies and practices, hopefully. And so this sort of effort to scale, the pressure to perform, is making some businesses make choices that are not in their best interests of the business, not really in the best interest of their customers, but they're in the best interest of KPIs or leaders who have been mandated to, we need to get on AI. We need to what is our AI strategy? How are we going to scale? How are we going to 100x our content, and those sorts of things? So that's one thing that I kind of say, hey, let's pause for a second, and let's focus on revenue. Like, let's focus on actual customer experience, retention, growth, those sorts of things, and implement these things accordingly.
Yes, indeed. And I think you touch a good point. And maybe it's the prototyping thing is the being the wise man in this case in order to because this is what I do. I usually say I'm enthusiastic of all these changes, but let's try to drink a coffee together and stop and be calm and see what really is convenient for us to do. And let's try with these things, not all like always when testing things, not testing all the things at the same time,
Yeah.
but let's do this. For instance, let's try these specific landing pages using this specific technique, these specific things that we can think it may be good and do an A/B testing. We can
Yeah.
use full things like Search Pilot, for instance, for doing this kind of test. There are also other tools for doing this kind of test. But I
Well, it's
want
building a use case. Again,
exactly.
mature marketing organizations have a methodology for adopting new things, and so the challenge, though, is some organizations have a content ecosystem that is very locked down, and there's really no room for them to experiment, and that's really too bad, because they have to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
such dramatic decisions in terms of implementation.
Yes,
Whereas
and
if you
this
do
is
have a
and this
blog, you
is
can experiment,
this is
for
something
example.
that I'm used to work also with uh, B2B, but especially in the other range. So medium to small B2B company also because I work a lot with obviously with Italy and Spain and the industrial let's say landscape in Italy and Spain is mostly 90%, more than 90% is small to medium business companies. So sometimes in that case, the problem is also is not scale. So it's not like when you're working with enterprise, so you don't have really to have a sort of organigram put in front of you in order to understand to whom you have to talk with and who really is taking the decision. But it's a different kind. Many times because they, in this smaller situation, you may be talking with someone who can even be the founder of a company. And
Right.
so it's you have to also be able, the famous word, soft skill, to criticize the founder of a company you're working for without being, I mean, is
Right.
proud. And then you have a very small team, and then maybe you have a myriad of external other consultant or agency doing one specific bit. One is doing the social media, one is the web agency making the website in terms of development. So in that case, it's more complicated because then you have really to plan things in order to happen. In enterprise, it's because you have all these steps to do before something happens. In the small business and medium businesses, because uh, not all the person can do so many things at the same time. So you have to plan accordingly.
Hmm.
And really, I think B2B is what really teach you how to prioritize things from technical implementation to content implementation and so on and so on and so on.
Well, that's been the case. This prioritization need is something that's been a part of SEO for many years. You do an audit and you come up with this huge list of opportunities, right? And whether you present that to the part-time developer that's helping a small business manage their website, or whether you present that to the IT department at a large enterprise, they're going to go, wait a minute. And so therefore, SEO advice is worth nothing unless it gets implemented, right? Marketing advice is worth nothing unless it gets implemented. So that prioritization is, I've seen, I'm sure you've experienced it too, has been central to getting implementation, right? It's like, okay, here are the top 5 things we need to tackle, and you work through that with them. And once they start to see impact, then maybe they loosen up a little bit for the rest of the list.
Yes, and also because one of the biggest nightmare I think for every marketer and SEO is that in in a Jira context, you're always the last task. The SEO task is always the last task, and so it's pushed every 15 days because it didn't make it in the first block of 15 days. So it's in the sprint. But we were talking at the beginning about creativity, and you recently are really talking about connecting B2B marketing with creator economy. Can you explain a little better what are your ideas and with an example, for instance, you have produced with these ideas in mind?
Sure. So I should say, for context, we've been involved in medium and large enterprise B2B companies engaging us to activate the most trusted voices in their industry as content partners since 2012, 2013. So it's been a long time. And so, I mean, companies like LinkedIn, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and so forth. So why are these big brands so interested in partnering with these individuals? And it's because people don't trust brands. They don't trust brand advertising generally. Some of it makes its way through, but generally people don't trust formal marketing communications. What they do trust is other people, other humans that they are following, that have earned their respect and that have credibility, especially in B2B. So the notion I would pick apart, or I would point to about the notion of creator in B2B, to me, there's a difference between an influencer and a creator in B2B. An influencer is someone who has earned credibility. They have credentials. They have been in the field. They have been recognized by their peers. They have a body of work. And that authority is very, very clear. And there's evidence of that authority. A creator, which is a concept that kind of came over from B2C, is someone who is really great at creating media. They're charismatic. They can create content. They have a following. They aren't necessarily bringing us a high depth of expertise around a particular thing. Increasingly, they do, though. And this is great for everybody. Everybody wins when we have an influencer that's also a creator at the same time. Everybody wins in that situation. And I'm happy to say that there are more and more. So the idea is that we have a methodology called best answer marketing, and that is, and within that best answer marketing framework, there's a pillar called a trust system. And that means it's a requirement that any marketing initiative has to understand how we can build trust for the brand, not just visibility. Like, what good is it if you show up in the, on search results if no one trusts what they find after they click, right? So one of the characteristics of inspiring trust, of course, is having trusted people part of the conversation. And so a B2B brand might think about, like, I'm just this morning I was talking with a company, they're doing a new product launch, right? And they're not known for this new product. It's a very innovative product in the enterprise space, and it solves some really important problems in the marketplace. So what better way to become quickly relevant for a solution than to partner with people who already have the attention and trust of the audience you're after around that topic, and architect a content collaboration situation where they can talk about problems that are felt by that audience, your customers, problem solution channels and methods and those sorts of things. What are all the questions that the buyers have around that topic? The brand can partner with those creators or influencers and to collaborate on content around those ideas. And so you get a couple of things as a B2B brand, as a client, when you do this kind of collaboration. One, of course, you get content, you get attention, and you can start to influence conversations, and you start to create affinity between your brand and the solution. And you're using, or your work with the people who already have respect and attention around that topic, that starts to be imparted upon you as a brand, right? And you get distribution to their audiences. So you've got content that you can use for your own thought leadership or demand gen and lead gen, but you've also got a channel, meaning your community of influencers you're working with, as a way in which to distribute that kind of messaging to people who actually trust the source and are probably ignoring the ads you're running. They're probably not even opening the emails that you're blasting, and they might not even be clicking through because of AI overviews into the answers that they're finding when they do a search on Google. You asked for an example. There's a social media marketing platform called Sprinkler, which you may have heard of. Sprinkler was launching a new self-service version of their software. So they're enterprise social media management, right? Quite expensive, very robust system, not just social media marketing, but also customer support. And they were launching a DIY, well, not DIY, the self-service sort of version of this to mid-market companies. And so what we did is we worked with them to identify some individuals that are quite relevant in the social media marketing space. And there's an AI component to this solution as well. So we had some AI influencers as well. Paul from the AI Marketing Institute, for example, Paul Rotzer. So what we did is we decided to create an event, and it's sort of a master class. And we did long form interviews, and we actually brought film crews to the physical locations where these influencers were, and they were all in the US. And we filmed them talking about best practices, and there's sort of a shooting sheet, if you will. I'm sorry, I'm brain cramping on what you call it, but a shot list, if you will,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the topics they were to cover, and then that was all in post production put together as an event. We had briefings with all the influencers, and then we had a larger number of influencers that weren't part of that masterclass, and we had briefings, meaning that we had a meeting with executives from the brand as well as these influencers, and we did a demo in real time to show them what this new self-service platform could do. Those people went out and they shared their experience about what they learned, and the call to action was to go to the masterclass. And then we also did all the other promotions you would do to drive attention to the masterclass, including the influencers sharing to their own channels. And so there were over 5,000 registrations to this masterclass, and contribution to pipeline revenue was a substantial number. In fact, the comment we got from the marketing leader at Sprinkler was that this is the best thing that's ever happened to Sprinkler marketing. So that went really well. They don't all go that well. We're talking about 20 influencers, but 6 of them were involved in the masterclass part. So that was a more robust, long form video shoot and all the editing and whatnot. But Yeah, it can go really well. And the thing is, the data informed strategy is everything, meaning the understanding of what audience wants, what content formats they want, what topics they want to hear about, what questions they want answered. Absolutely instrumental for the success of any marketing program, and especially an influencer or creator type of program.
And because obviously, when it comes to individuating this kind of influencer, that many times are in the bigger perspective of influencer marketing, could be considered micro influencer because of numbers, not because of engagement. What is the process you use in order to individuate the right ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a question a lot of people have and that they're challenged by. We've been doing original research on influencer marketing for B2B, and we're just about to publish our fifth report. And every single year, the number one challenge that people say they are experiencing with influencer programs is being able to identify the right influencers, being able to recruit them. And so your question is quite relevant. And so we have a methodology. It's obviously more than popularity. In fact, these days, popularity is definitely not even the second most important thing. We do need to have relevance. The topical relevance of what it is that they publish and how they're known amongst their community or their audience is the number one thing. Resonance, that is a metric that determines or that communicates the degree to which that topic that they're known for actually creates interaction and engagement amongst their community, right? Because the whole idea is that if we work with you, if we worked with you on it, if it's, let's say we were doing work with a SEO software company and we identified you as an influencer, well, we'd want to make sure we validated that with the content that you publish, your podcast, that you're actually your community actually likes what you say. They engage with what you say around the topic that you would be activated for. So those are important things. The other thing is we have, because we're working with a lot of different types of companies in the B2B space, we have archetypes that we've identified. Because the problem is a lot of people think of influence as a 0 or 1. They think of it as a one size fits all sort of thing. Someone's either influential or they're not. The thing is in order to be effective, you've got to map the right type of influencer to the type of content and channel if you expect performance to happen.
So you have
So
the wizard influencer, the jester influencer.
yeah. So you have situations where we have what we call a brand individual, right? A
Mhm.
brand individual is someone who they make all their money. They're a creator basically, and they make all their money off of being a creator, right? And so they're a professional. But in the B2B space, that's also the kind of person that's doing keynote presentations. They write books. They're in the media all the time in that industry. So they're quite a famous person. They cost a lot and they'll get you a lot of awareness, but they're not going to get you conversions. They're very high level. Then you might have a micro influencer, right? Or you might have a subject matter expert, someone who is living and breathing the problems buyers are thinking about day after day. And that person is going to bring a level of credibility that is very much aligned with what gets people to buy things. So you've got to map the right kind of creator or influencer with the kind of content and of course also the channels. Why would I go to someone in the B2B space that is only publishing a newsletter and expect them to create fantastic videos or reels or short form video shorts for YouTube? I mean, they may not have what we need, right? And when a company is paying and they're paying these influencers for deliverables, they expect performance. In the B2B space, a great brand individual is Corporate Natalie, right? Corporate Natalie is tier one. She's an actor, right? I mean, she has the same skills as a professional actor that's in TV and movies would have, right? But she also has an audience that's in a business context, right? And so there's a time and a place to engage someone like that, especially with that price tag, and it'll get you the performance you need from an awareness standpoint. But there are other influencers that, again, they are super users of software. They are subject matter experts that are in the forums. People are following them because they're answering questions and solving problems. And if you can get that person to talk about your product, there's a really good chance folks are going to sign up for a trial, a demo, to pilot, or download a resource of some kind. And so you've got to map the right kind of influencers to the use case in which they are going to contribute to the marketing outcomes that you've identified. So reach, relevance, resonance, that's the starting point of identifying, topical relevance and resonance. And the fact, obviously we want to have some threshold of reach. if we expect them to distribute the content. The other thing is brand hosted or influencer hosted. So what's happening in the creator marketing space is that in the B2C and B2B creators, they're tasked with creating content and they publish on their own channel, and that's it. And the CTA is to some brand page, and no one wants to click on that to go to a brand page, but their people are paying for that. Brand hosted influencer content, that's where you're collaborating with influencers and their contributions live on brand social. Their contributions live on the brand website or blog or newsletter or at a physical event, especially. So it's the combination of those two things that is super powerful. What unfortunately mistake a lot of folks make is thinking of doing only one or the other. Either we get influencer quotes on a research report and that's it, or we have some influencers or creators create some videos, publish them on Instagram and LinkedIn, and that's it.
Yeah,
And you need both.
remind me of a very classic digital PR technique, which is used a lot in data-driven B2C digital PR, which is substantially co-authoring a research, data-driven research about anything really, with the subject matter expert about that topic. And using him, we really know we know that he is respected, and so to already give trust to the content even before it has been published.
Of course.
So you also, with his support, substantially you are selling the digital PR piece to the right newspaper to be promoted. Maybe the first one in exclusive and then coming the other. So this is also a classic strategy. But I want to ask you a question. We have just finished the football championship, world championship, and Spain won. And Spain classic is creating your resources from when they are really small and growing with under 19, under 21, and to the major team. What about also for a B2B company to discover the resources inside the company that can be their, let's say, influencer?
Yeah. Yeah. We call it building influence from within,
Yeah.
and are running multiple executive influence programs right now. We have been, and yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two parts to your two parts to the answer to your question. One is outside, and the other is inside. Outside is that you can nurture up and coming influencers, right? In fact, there's an expression: if you contract a famous influencer, they're your friend for a day. But if you help someone become influential, they'll be your friend for life. And working with micro influencers in this way, developing a relationship with them and making them part of your overall influencer program can create a tremendous amount of organic, multiple of exposure versus the contractual obligation and deliverables that would happen with a pro influencer. Now, on the inside look, you've got individuals who are subject matter experts, key opinion leaders. You have executives who are public facing. People are in the B2B space, they're hungry to hear from people at the company, not just corporate speak in
Mhm.
formal marketing. So there is a demand for what you're talking about, this internal influence. And it's not accomplished simply by the CEO starting a blog or a podcast. One of the things that we do is, and we're very bullish on video podcasts, C-level creators, you might call them, where you have a charismatic CEO or senior executive, and maybe they're the host of this podcast, or they're a partner with the head of communications. So the two of them from the brand, and then they bring on customers. They bring on business unit leaders from their own organization. They bring in prospective customers. They bring in industry influencers and thought leaders, and they have a conversation. And what happens is that's an opportunity for the brand executive, the C-level executive especially, to acquire influence, to acquire credibility because of the intelligence they're demonstrating, the competency they're demonstrating as they're talking with a recognized industry leader from outside the company. It's called borrow to build. You borrow influence from someone else to build your own. It's a PR concept.
Yeah,
Like,
and in classic SEO would be the famous Barnacle SEO. You use
sure.
the influence of a website to promote your own brand and hopefully bringing people to your website.
I think, yeah. And I think there's a lot, we're going to see this grow a lot more. We touched on this on one of our earlier reports. There's a whole section dedicated just to executive influence. But I think we're going to see more demand for this because the pace of demand for creators is faster than the available tier one creators. So what's happening is, and one of the most common pain points I'm hearing when companies come to us, because if you search for B2B influencer marketing, Top Rank is there, is that the creators are not responding to them. They're trying to do it on their own. And the creators are just not responding to them because they've got so much business, right? And so okay, well, if we can't get industry, if we can't get all the people we want to be part of our influencer creator program, what can we do? Well, what you should do is simultaneously build influence from within at the same time. And there you can invest in the footprint and credibility and content, which, of course, as you know, when we create content, that creates many hooks in the water, as it were, for entry points, whether it comes through search, through social, through email, through any other PR or other marketing initiative. When we can create that unique content that's born out of conversations between experts, that is truly a unique thing. And it's very, very hard to duplicate.
Hmm. Right. And as someone who worked many, many years in audiovisual and cinema and TV, when it comes to choosing the right format for the correct, so combining the right format with the right influencer, external or internal or both. I don't want to ask you how you decide which format is better because I think we can talk about this, but I wanted to ask you something which is it never happened that the format that wasn't really convincing you was ultimately the one that worked.
So you're asking if the a format we tried just wasn't working out,
No, the
and
contrary, a
oh,
format that you were thinking, oh, let's try this. I'm not really convinced, but it convinced because of the success.
oh, sure, that we weren't really convinced on. I mean, sometimes it's not about the format; it's about the appropriateness of the format for the situation.
Hmm.
So here's an example. A lot of B2B companies are involved with events, trade shows, right? And, I guess this is kind of related to the Barnacle idea that so to participate in a trade show, you could be a speaker, organic speaker, you could be a paid speaker, you could sponsor, you could have a booth, right? There's lots of things you can do. But sometimes companies will say, well, look, we want to launch something and we know there's a lot of excitement in the industry around this particular event, but we're not going to go to the event. We want to talk about the event, but we're not actually going to go to the event. We're going to talk about things that are related to the event and see if we can get some traction, get some attention and interest that way. On the surface, that sounds like, I don't know, I'm not sure that's going to work. Well, we did try a thing like that where we sent a couple of influencers to the event. So the brand did not have a booth, they did not have a sponsorship, they didn't have anything happening physically at the event. But we did send two influencers as sort of like, on the street journalists, if you will, and they were given tasks to do. They were to reflect on what's happening at the event relevant to the brand. They were to identify people that they could go and interview. And that created content that drove conversations in connection to the event, but it was published by a company that wasn't even there, and they received benefit from it. They received attention. They were able to borrow the intelligence and relevance of the influencer physically being at the event without having to go to the event themselves in order to be part of the conversation around the event. And of course, that
Hmm.
drew traffic and attention to their solution pages.
This is even more than barnacle, a sort of vampirism.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, it's something that we've done for
But
a
it's a
long
smart
time.
idea. It's like
Yeah.
I want to use, for instance, the impact of Comic Con without even going to Comic Con, but sending someone at Comic Con who is not formally related to me. It's an interesting idea. And one question I have for you, and it's okay. We were talking quite a lot about creativeness. Let's talk about one boring thing, which is a classic in B2B of every kind, which is having, the classic informational section of your website. So once it was the classic blogging part, and maybe used just for chasing visibility in search results with a specific keyword and so on. Especially in certain types of B2B, but also certain type of B2C with a specific user and user facing products. The new mantra is you don't have to, maybe also connected to the correct philosophy of product led SEO, you have not to create any more informational content. Just the right content that just is meant to target the needs of your potential customer. But if we want to be considered a topical authority about a specific topic, my question is, it is somehow a rhetorical question, how can we be considered also by the machine an authority about a topic if we don't create content about the topic also in the top of the funnel phase? What is your opinion?
Well, you need to be present, you need to be relevant, and the mechanisms that happens through content, through entities. It's entirely possible, unlikely, it's entirely possible that people who are respected around an idea talk about you and about your brand, and you're not actually creating proactively content around that idea, but they're creating social content, they're creating editorial content that mentions your brand in that context, even though you're not creating content about it at all or not substantially. And that can create relevance and subsequently visibility for your brand around those ideas. That's hard to do. You've got to give them a reason to talk about you, right? However, there are elements of influencer programs that do make this happen. For example, when a new product or a new business is sort of, it's not explicit yet, it's covert, right? It's not launched just yet, so the influencers have been given private information that they can then use and share publicly, even though the brand hasn't published this information itself, right? That's an example. But here's the thing I think about when people talk about, informational content and whether we should be producing it or not because it's not generating any clicks. They're just, AI overviews are just copying our information to create an answer. And there's a organization called Ehrenberg Institute, and LinkedIn's B2B Institute has shared this as well. 95% of B2B buyers are not even in market to buy anything at any given time. Only 5% are. However, when someone makes the transition from the 95 to the 5, they've already got a short list. They've already got a small list of vendors that they're thinking about. How in the world do you think you get on that short list before the time comes for them to start conducting a vendor search? It's through informational content. So while from a visibility and click through and website visit standpoint, the KPIs we as marketers often rely on aren't necessarily satisfied by publishing informational content, the battle of the mind and mental availability is absolutely satisfied with that informational content. So I think a company has to understand, how relevant do they want to be? How short do they want to make that sales cycle? And they should invest accordingly. If they want to put all their money into the outbound sales and all on the end of the sales cycle type of effort to try and battle with all those other competitors to be relevant at the moment of need, when they could have been relevant from the start. And I don't think you have to waste money on this. You can be targeted about it, but I think informational content still has a role to play.
And I think we can find also a more, let's say, technical reason for preaching for certain kind, good kind of informational content, which can be on-site or off-site with people talking about you in terms of informational content. And it's the training data. Because training data, if your brand is constantly associated to, in a classic SEO would be, we would be saying the keyword you're targeting. So the branded keyword, in this case, is the branded entity. So your brand as an entity associated to the entity you are selling or creating products about and around. When it comes to the funnel is generated from the things LLMs having the training data. And then they search, they generate the fan out, and the fan out is search on real data, on live search. And it's so common to find that the query fan out is already biased towards certain types of brands. The brands that AI consider worth to be to ingest for the training data. If you are not creating content or the training data or worth the attention of the training data, also your brand is going probably not to be so relevant for the training data and not popping up in the query fan out, hence in the pool of a generated answer.
You're speaking to the whole premise behind our best answer marketing framework, right? And that is creating the signals of credibility, architecting the signals of credibility that manifest your company as that best answer. It's the reason why we're heavy advocates of original research, right? Why we're heavy advocates of partnering with the most credible voices in an industry to talk about you, right? And not just talking about yourself, because LLMs don't care as much about brand content on your own page. They're looking for consensus,
I
right?
use yes, yes. I have all my theory. I think you know it about the good combination of consensus and information gain,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
too much consensus is making you invisible substantially, but being contrarian is making you be banned by Google,
Right.
ChatGPT. The only little bit moderate is maybe Claude, but okay. But so I usually call it the Trojan. This is also the period where the Odysseus is in the movie theater. So using the Trojan horse strategy, so use the horse like you start with a consensus, and inside the horse, you put your information gain points. This is the best thing is to to put a step, especially if you're a new company that is trying to break into a market against the consensus brand.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, of course, everything I'm talking about is earned. You know what I mean? It's
Yes.
no, we're not buying. I know you're not saying this, but we're not buying links.
No, 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 me
We're
neither.
not
But
buying placements, but we are talking about creating information access to things that result in that kind of contextual relevance, that kind of citation,
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
occurs.
yes,
And it's not just influencers, it's media too. So
yes,
there's a media
totally.
relations aspect to this. When you publish original research, especially, it's just something that travels, right? When you have unique insights, proprietary data, it doesn't have to be survey of thousands of people. You could have your own proprietary data if you're the kind of company sitting on that kind of data. And if you share benchmark insights or anything like that, that it's unique. It's unique to you, and that's something that has gravity. LLMs are attracted to unique
Yes,
insights, and so are
yes,
humans. So everybody wins, right?
yes, yes, indeed. So let's go with a last question. Not about influencer, not about AI, not about search, but about you. In the introduction, I said times CEO of top ranking. And off the record, you told me a little bit about your story, but what kind of thoughts you had during the many marathons that you was doing during your half and a year, 1 year and a half out of a business, let's say retired, happily
Yeah.
retired, to make you desire to come play on the field of marketing?
Are you asking about was there a relationship between the running I was doing and the
No,
field of marketing?
it's just a metaphor. When I
Oh,
mean, when you were running 2 hours and so on, maybe you were thinking at anything. But I was. It's just a joke. Maybe you were thinking, okay, after 1 year and a half of doing marathons and taking time for yourself, what was, if can be said publicly,
yeah.
what makes you desire to return on working?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. What made me decide to come back? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny. And when you're running, you're chasing, right? You're chasing speed, you're chasing completion of a distance, you're chasing in a race, with your
Mhm.
peers. And, I always thought of marketing as a chase. You have clear objectives, you have KPIs and outcomes and ROI and all those sorts of things. And I really missed that. I think if I was to prioritize the things that I miss the most, that is one of them, but it wasn't the number one. I think the number one was the people that I get to work with. The average tenure at Top Rank is almost 10 years, right? The average time people have been at this company is almost 10 years. So I've gotten to know the folks that are at Top Rank really well over many years. And there's some really, really talented, creative people, analytical people. And I really did miss that environment of collaboration. And we're a distributed workforce, meaning that we don't work in one physical office. because of COVID, right? We started working from home and we found ways to create a collaborative, atmosphere on things, and having a bunch of smart people working on the same thing. It's just very exciting, and being able to express creativity, and even in B2B, it's very exciting to me. So the chase of trying to get great results for clients, trying to land all these big logos that we have. I miss that, and I miss working with really talented people. And of course, while I am CEO, I'm my fingers are still in the pie, as it were,
Hmm.
of marketing for ourselves. I host a podcast myself, and I still write blog posts, and I do a little bit of speaking, not very much anymore. But yeah, I do enjoy the craft of marketing.
Cool, cool. And yes, it's something like when I don't want to say it's like a vocation. Maybe it's too big word to say for a marketer, but it's true when you are doing a job which is not sound like a job because you like it. I mean, it's something that it's hard to live, and we are happy you return.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm excited. I feel like I got another, kind of a 2.0,
Mhm.
another opportunity to create things the way that I've always envisioned. And when I was in university many years ago, I had this vision of what kind of agency I wanted to have, and that's exactly what we're building right now. So I'm excited.
Cool, cool. So this is a wonderful closure for our conversation, and really, really thank you, Lid, for having shared this hour with me and with all the people listening and watching to us.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate the questions, Gianluca, and it's been great having this conversation with you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you too. Remember, we were talking all the hour about influencers, so let me do the influencer part. Remember to subscribe to the channel so it will grow thanks to you. And remember to ring on the bell so to be notified when a new episode of the third session are going to be live. Ciao.